Greetings, and welcome to Mediocre Minis. I'm not gonna lie, I have been in a bit of a hobby slump as of late. No real reason as to why, it's just I wasn't really in the mood for anything that I currently have sitting on my shelves or any works in progress I really wanted to complete. Now, of course, this happens to all of us from time to time. We reach a point when you just don't feel like doing some of the things that you have around. Nothing's really exciting you. And again, that's okay. And there's always a few ways to overcome this. One of the things that we can do is try something completely different. Whether it's work on terrain, build some new miniatures, look at some things that we've had stored away, or there's one more thing that you can actually do to help get you motivated again. Simply put, buy more minis. And that is exactly what I ended up doing. I really wasn't excited by anything, so I went out and bought something new, which I know sounds kind of weird and counterintuitive, but it most certainly did the trick. Now, in order for me to get back into the groove and buy something new, my wife, Vault Fox, and we went to one of our local game stores. And while browsing the shelves, I just looked for something that seemed interesting or cool, and then I ended up walking away with this. The Hell Wasp by WizKids. Now, first, before we get too deep into this, there is something that I should address. Did I realize while looking at this miniature that on every side of the box it said Paint Kit? No. Did I pay attention to the contents on the back of the box that clearly states it comes with paint, brushes, a pot, along with the miniature itself? No. Did I do anything with this miniature other than look inside, see that it looked cool, and picked it up? No. I saw a cool miniature, paid no attention to anything else, and bought it. What I realized when I got home was this is not just a miniature, it is actually a kit. In a way, a starter set of paints, brushes, and a miniature itself. So what started as me just finding something new and exciting to do, now kind of turned into looking at a paint kit and giving my thoughts and opinions on it. So as we take a look at this paint kit, it is clear it comes with just about everything you need to get started with painting. There's a plastic tray that everything comes attached to, and it has several wells in it that you can actually use as a palette if you don't have something already available. It comes with 12 different paints from Vallejo, 2 different brushes, a small paint pot that you can use as a water cup, and of course the miniature itself. The Vallejo paint pots come in these small little containers, and they're actually kind of hard to open up. The tabs on each of the pots are fine, but I found it easier just to put a fingernail underneath the rim and pop it up, as opposed to pulling on the tabs. Each pot of paint was in really good shape. Nothing was dried out, and from what I can tell, they sealed up pretty well. So in theory, if you close these properly, they could last a relatively long period of time. And even though they are smaller, with not as much paint, they are most certainly better than the paint pots that Games Workshop puts out. Also in the box are 2 fully acceptable synthetic brushes. They're not very fancy, and they seem to look pretty nice at first glance. But we'll get more into the brushes later on. One of these brushes is labeled as a fine detail, and the other is marked as general purpose. However, the only major difference that I can see at first glance is one brush has longer bristles than the other, and they're relatively the same size, just a little difference in length. Now, one other thing to keep in mind with this paint box is there is a QR code on the side, and scanning this or following the website that is listed will take you to the WizKids product site, and there's also a video that corresponds with this specific miniature. Now, the video I will get into a little bit later on, and its usefulness and what I found while watching it. Now, taking a look at the miniature itself, it is pretty comparable to other models by WizKids, as that it already comes pre-primed, which is always really nice when you're first getting started and if you don't happen to have any primer available. There are a handful of mold lines on this miniature, but they can be easily taken care of. If you happen to have a knife or other sharp object around, you can easily scrape them away. Just one thing to keep in mind is, since this is pre-primed, scraping away any mold lines can remove some of the primer, so I would just be a little bit careful, and if you need to do a little bit of touch-up, that can be done, though you shouldn't have too many problems, as for the most part, the miniature is in real great shape. Now, of course, the body of the Hell Wasp is primed itself, but the wings are not. which will come into play a little bit later on, but to start off with, it's not too bad of a concern. The wings of the hell wasp somewhat stick into their holes. This isn't a major issue, as a small drop of super glue will fix it in place when it comes time for assembly, but if you were expecting just to pop them in, you might have to use a lot of force to really get them in there, or they have a danger of falling out, as the holes are fine, but they're not perfect. The wings also have small markings on them, such as R1, R2, L1, and L2, which I believe these markings are where exactly on the wasp it goes. And it's relatively easy to put together, but it is kind of nice that there are some markings there. The good news is you can easily scrape away those little numbers and letters, just so they don't show up whenever you begin painting. However, if you don't, based on where they're placed, you probably won't have too much of a problem, and they really won't be visible all that much. But I scraped them off anyways. Now, with everything ready to go, I decided it was time to start painting. And I really wanted to mimic the box art with this miniature, and also follow any other steps and guides that are provided, as long as trying to use only the materials that are within this paint kit as possible, just to see how they would work, and also to potentially think of if this could be useful for someone who is new to the hobby. And I lost my spot in my script, so this is going to take a moment. Now, as part to follow the plan that was given on WizKids website, and also to follow the box art, I started by painting the miniature black to serve as a base coat. However, there is one problem with that, and it ties into my small issue with the brushes. The brushes are just way too small for covering very large areas. Now, it's okay, and I use these brushes the majority of the time, but base coating the entire miniature with such a small pointed brush really can take a very long time to do so, and it can be a little bit frustrating when you are constantly adding more paint to it, and it's just hard to cover a much larger area. Now, since these two brushes are very similar in size, it would have been nice if one was slightly larger to help with this process in covering larger areas, but it's something that you can use and get away with if this is all you have. But if you do happen to have a larger brush handy, I would use that, and that's what I did because I wanted to save time, and I just happened to have them. Now, as I start moving on to the paints, I will say the paints are great. They are Vallejo paints after all, and you get exactly what you would expect when using those products. They're awesome. They all went on very smooth, no real issues, nothing was dried out in these pots, though I will note that some tended to be a little bit thinner than what I would expect, but it's not that big of a deal as you generally thin down paints a little bit with water anyways. Not really a problem, very high quality paints, and I would definitely recommend this brand in general, or just using them out of this kit if you happen to get your hands on it. Now, I will say this miniature has a lot of really great detail, but it is something to keep in mind when you are a new painter. It can be easy to miss certain areas since there's so much area to cover, especially with the two provided brushes. It can be a little bit frustrating trying to get every nook and cranny. Luckily, again, I just used a larger one, and if you don't have one, you can still get it. It will, again, just take some time. Oh, now there is one minor complaint I actually have about the miniature. It's already attached to the base. There is, of course, a small rocky section at the bottom, a clearish acrylic tube that the hell wasp sits on, and of course it's mounted onto it. But it is already attached and it cannot be removed. And that can be very difficult, especially if you're trying to get into the belly and some other hard to reach areas. Taking off the base would have been very nice, but since it's stuck on there, you're kind of working in some odd angles. Sometimes it's harder to see, and that I can see being very frustrating for a new painter, because it certainly was for me. Anyway, back to painting the miniature. After the black base coat dried, I moved forward with the rest of the mini. 2 thin coats of violets to start off, followed with some blue-violet for the highlights, and a final highlight was then applied by using a small amount of white into that blue-violet. I started off with violet on the belly, but then later changed my mind and covered it with orange fire. Like many oranges, coverage lacks something to be desired. Now, I don't mind too much because it ended up working very well in the end, but just keep in mind if you're using this specific paint, and it will take a few extra coats for you to be able to get that really nice opaque finish. After the orange was dried and fully opaque, I used a few coats of the gold yellow. which I'm not going to lie is probably one of the better yellows I've used. And I actually went out later and got a sole bottle of this yellow because I liked it so much and can see myself using it a lot in the future. Just like before, a few layers of paint really worked out nicely for the legs and antenna. I didn't push the highlights too far here as I didn't want to take away from the rest of the miniature, and also I got a little bit lazy when it came to painting those specific parts. It happens. Sometimes we just get a little bit lazy. The stinger was completed in the same way as the rest of the miniature with violet, red violet, orange fire, and gold yellow. Again, I did this to not only follow the box art, but also to mimic with what I was planning on doing with the wings later on. Alright, now before we paint the wings, there are two things that I want to address. First, of course, is they're not primed. Could you, in theory, get away with painting your miniatures without them being primed? Yeah. But you should prime them. It really helps with adhesion, it helps maintain some durability, and it is a good way to get a full solid base coat of a specific color, so you're not painting over clear, which could, in theory, make it a little bit harder to get fully opaque base coats anyways. Second is mounting the wings onto something to make it a little bit easier to handle. Holding on to the wings themselves with your hands can be fine, but you can get some cramps with that. It's not very comfortable. So what I ended up doing was taking the wings and shoving them into the end of wine bottle corks. Now, using the corks wasn't perfect, and one wing actually kept falling off, but I was able to get to the wings, hold them comfortably, and be able to paint all surfaces without having to worry about grabbing potentially wet paint or rubbing any dried paint off with my fingers. Now, there are other methods you could use, such as glue, poster tack, but this ended up working out relatively well for me as I had some cork lying around. After I had the wings on the cork, I actually used the little included water pot to hold primer. Along with a larger brush, yeah, I know, I'm using a larger brush again. Along with the larger brush that I used for base coating before, it was a quick process to get in there and prime the miniatures. I chose white for this step as a primer color, because I was going to use red, orange, and yellow on the wings, and white would make the overall coverage easier and also be a little bit more vibrant with the end result. Once the primer dried, I used bloody red, orange fire, gold yellow, and white flesh for the wing colors. It is important to never use pure white on large areas of models, because white can be very bright and overbearing, and it'll really stand out in an unrealistic way if you do use pure white. So an off-white is almost always a good bet, whether it be Pale Sand by Vallejo, this white flesh color here with part of this kit, or another color such as Ice Yellow. An off-white will always work best, and only use a pure white for the brightest of highlights. After the wings were done, I attached them to the miniature with a small drop of super glue, just so that they stayed in place and I never had to worry about them falling off. I am super happy with this miniature. It was very quick and simple to paint, and it really helped get my mojo back to start painting and also to work on other projects. The box art provided me with enough information to use as a guide, but it might have been a little bit harder for newer painters as there's only a few images. Now, before I give my final thoughts on this paint kit, I do want to address the video that is provided on WizKids' website. The video does show the colors that are used to recreate the box art, as it probably should. However, that is really as much as I got from the video myself. My main issue is the video uses tools that are simply not part of the kit, and it would make it very hard to follow along step by step if the painter in the video is using things that you just don't happen to have on hand. More specifically, the video uses a wet palette and different types of brushes. Now, the wet palette you can get away with not using. Heresy, yes I know, but with the provided wells that you come in the plastic packaging, you can use that. It'll just dry out a little bit faster. But the brushes really are what is the difference between what is in the video and what is provided. For instance, one of the main techniques used to base coat the body of the Hell Wasp itself is dry brushing. Now, while you could, in theory, dry brush with these two included brushes, it'll take you forever and it's going to be a mess. it'll be very difficult to do so. So that is one thing that kind of threw me off of you have this, but then again, you didn't include it in the box. The dry brushing would be a very good method to use for quickly painting and highlighting. All right, now with that out of the way, let's talk about the kit overall and what my thoughts are on it. Overall, I like it. A really nice miniature, 12 really nice paints, 2 brushes, a water cup, and a tray that can be used as a palette. The base of the miniature is large enough so that you can hold it as well, and no need to use a handle, though you could still use one as I ended up doing as well. Now, this kit has everything in it. Brushes, paints, the miniature. It's relatively nice. And also being sold for 20 bucks, that's not bad at all. To give an attempt at painting for the first time with a cool looking miniature for $20, you really can't beat that. However, I will say that if you are a more advanced painter, you already have a large array of tools, such as additional paints, brushes, palettes, etc., then you probably don't need to buy this kit specifically. WizKids does sell this Hell Wasp on its own for about $10. I actually found one at my local game store recently, just sitting on the shelf, though searching around online, you'll have to do a little bit of digging. So overall, I really liked this kit. It came with everything you needed. I will probably keep using these paints because they store relatively well within their respective pots. And it can also inspire me to eventually pick up these colors in the full dropper bottles later on down the line. And if you're looking to get a gift for somebody, $20 is a really inexpensive but fun item for someone to use. It's just if you're an experienced painter and you already have a lot of tools and paints, you're probably not going to need it. And if anything, this taught me to pay a little bit more attention to what I was actually going to buy whenever I went out to a store. Alright, hi, Mediocre Editing here. So apparently the camera that I use stops recording after a period of time, and guess who didn't realize that before they filmed the end of the video? That's right, it's me. Anyway, moving forward, I thank you very much for watching this video. I do appreciate it. Hopefully you learned something about these WizKids Paint Kits if you don't already have one, or if you've never even seen them. Have you actually seen these in the wild? Have you used them yourself? Please let me know your thoughts down below, as I am interested to see what other people happen to think of these. Thanks again for watching, I really do appreciate it. This has been Mediocre Minis, and I shall return.